pastor need to make an announcement?
I will just.
On behalf of Yesod Foundation, we are so happy to welcome Rabbi Zalman and his beloved, Eve Ilsen, and it wouldn't be Valentine's Day without them. Every year we've been graced with wonderful teachings and serenading from Eve, and this time Rabbi Zalman is joining his cabaret artist, just like the Kosher Hams predicted, it's already happening. Rabbi Zalman is the sideliner to Eve. Anyway, we're very happy for all your wisdom and wit and music tonight. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
You make me smile with my heart. Your looks unlaughable, unphotographable. Yet, how am I going to do this? You're my favorite work of art. Is your figure less than Greek? Is your mouth a little weak? When you open it to speak, are you smart? But don't change a hate for me. Not if you care for me. Stay, funny Valentine. Stay. Each day is Valentine's Day. With you each day is Valentine's Day. We inherited the title to this talk, which was, "Is Cupid Jewish?" And I would like to tell you where I first ran into Cupid, and it wasn't Jewish. But it also wasn't Greek, and this is what I found was interesting. The first place I ran into this description was in a Hindu history of the Great Mother, called the Kalika Purana. And it happened like this. There's this image of the sort of triune Godhead sitting around, and Brahma is busy being very inward and meditating. And out of his deep meditations came the 10 sort of assistants to creation and the 10 lords of the creatures. And there they all were, and they were all sitting in meditation, all deeply inward. And as he would go inside to his own nature, something else would occur, and as soon as it occurred to him, it would appear. Except, at one point, something simply popped out before it occurred to him. And that was this is the image. You must remember, myth is always metaphor. This stunning, very dark young woman. And it's the first mention of any females around either. Stunning creature. And after looking and wondering what this was about, Brahma went again inside into meditation, and before he could do anything, out came another unexpected involuntary creation. And this was a gorgeous youth. And now listen to this description. Stunning, muscular, lean, lithe, young, and with a flower bow and 5 flower arrows. Sound familiar? And everybody stood there sort of contemplating this new being who then asked Brahma, give me my job, what am I supposed to do? We only function well when we're doing what we're supposed to do. And so he went back into meditation and discovered what this new involuntary creation was. And he said, you are the inflamer of desire. You are the waker up of all feeling. When you shoot your flower arrows, no one will be able to resist them. Not even us, not even all the gods, not even all the aids to creation will be able to resist your arrows. And it's because of you and your arrows that the creation will perpetuate itself, because you're the wakener of desire. And then he kind of dismissed him and went on contemplating this beautiful, dark, blue-black young woman. And at that point, Kama, desire, decided to test out whether he was actually adequate to the task. So he hid behind a pillar and shot his arrows at every one of the heavenly consort. Now, doesn't this sound a little bit like Pamalia Shalmala, the heavenly family, who are busy with the work of perpetuating and creating the world? And as he did that, suddenly all these detached meditators found themselves, one by one, crazed and inflamed by desire. Some of them broke into a sweat. Some of them showed other manifestations, but the story continues from there. But that's the first appearance that I found of the Cupid-like figure who shoots with the arrows made of flowers, and whose job it is to do exactly that, so that the work of perpetuating the world will continue.
I sat down and made a short list of a number of words that speak of love in Hebrew. I'll read them to you.
What happened to your mic?
Pardon? The mic is on and I can hear it. So it's Ahava, Achva, Shalom, and Reut, and you may remember these words. We say them at the wedding service. Furthermore, Gila, Rina, Ditza, Chedva. But more closely is a word like Chibba, Cheshek. The word Cheshek in Arabic translates itself into a cognate word Ishq. So when the Rambam speaks about the great love that we have for God, he speaks of it as Ishq in Arabic. And Sufis will speak of Ishkala Ma'abud Lillah. The love of God is the service of God.
Could you translate?
They don't translate, they're all synonyms for love. English doesn't have such good synonyms for it. Especially now, since at one point there was love for the country and love for parents and love for children. Now it's only making out, so English has gotten to be very poor. There's another word, chemda, and that's a wonderful word, and in fact, it's been used in Arabic, so that when you speak of a Muhammad and Hamid, then that's that same word for longing, desire. We speak of Habibut, Yedidut, Dveikut, and a kind of love that every child would like to have from a parent, Hemla. And we say it when we wake up in the morning. Moda ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam shechazarta v'nishmati bechemla rava emunatecha. Thank you for having given me back my soul with chemla. It's so wonderful because in comparison to saying that we come into life with the curse of Adam on us, with original sin, when you say in the morning, I awaken bechemla rabbah, so like Matt Fox is talking about it as original blessing. Rechimuta is the way you would use that with the Arabic, with the Aramaic, which already contains in itself the word for womb. So one can speak of love in the head, which is what the Rambam did, and he speaks of ishq. You can speak of the love that's in the heart, which is ahava. Yedidut, very closely related to the word dodi li, rani lo, that kind of loving. And then what fuels this longing, this desire, we speak of it as gaguim. Now this is not a complete list because I could have gone with some more, but this is what I got together just before we came here to make a shtickle list. And so when you pay attention to the way people say that Eskimos have so many words for snow, and you see how many words we have for love, and that is a wonderful, wonderful thing. So we need to begin to explore that a little bit. For us, it keeps coming that the longing that we feel is the longing that comes after separation. Once tension was introduced, polarity was introduced, and Eve has a wonderful skit about that when she does the story of the Garden of Eden from the point of view of the serpent. And someday you'll ask her to do that.
Like now?
No, she has other goodies for tonight. We talked about it before. So I want to go and ask this kind of question that I once heard a Chassid raise, and he said, why is it that the Infinite One sought to create a world, and this week, as we read in the Torah, it says, "V'asu li mishkan v'shachanti betocham," make me a sanctuary and I will dwell among them. Why should the Infinite want to dwell with us here below? So the answer that the rabbis have given is, "Nit'aveh HaKadosh Baruch Hu li yot lo dira betachtonim." God so desired, God so longed to have a dwelling here below. So they asked Rabbi Zalman of Ladi, why is it that God has such a longing? And he answered in Yiddish, "Auf kein Teibesbeck man kein Kasches nicht." When it comes to a passion, you can't ask questions. And that's a wonderful way in which he was talking about that. But there is something that if you have seen a cat and any kind of a bag or something that you can sneak in and hide in, you know, that's such a wonderful instinct that I want to go, you know, Suri Echsebach, my rock, I want to hide myself in the rock of ages, cleft from me, right? You want to go into that place. There is that longing that God has. One answer being given, another answer being given. On the second day of creation, water above, water below. Then God says, let there be a firmament. Interesting word. It means something like banged out and like almost like a shape upside down of a hollow. Yeah. Let there be a sky. Let there be a firmament in the sky. And let it divide between the water above and the water below. And again we hear that since that time on, the waters below have been weeping and crying, we should have been above. Why is it that we are here below? So that kind of outcry that the waters below have is back for that union. And when the sky weeps, it is also for that union to come together again with the water below. Often when you look at waves and you have a sense how waves storm and move up so strong, it's as if they were saying, we want to lift ourselves up to come back to that original place where we were in. A third model is being given, that of sun and moon, they were created on the fourth day, and they were saying that they were both of equal size. And then along comes the moon and says, I efshar, l'shnei malachim beketer echad. It is impossible for two kings to wear one crown. Okay, says God, so you make yourself smaller. And since that time, the moon has been waxing and waning, and on your way here, didn't you see what a beautiful crescent there was in the sky? And that sense that June, moon, spoon, you know, all of this makes for romantic stuff, is given to us from that longing that the moon has to become great again. And we are told that La'atid Lavo, there will be a time when the future will be now, that the moon will be equal again to the sun. I once wrote a science fiction story a long time ago. It was called Shalashudas on the Moon. Because it goes like this, I had just been telling about how, I'll do this b'kitzur. I'd just been telling about this midrash about the moon becoming big again and so on and so forth. So this guy says to me, so it goes in the story, Mr. Horowitz, I'm a science fiction fan myself, he says, but how could I believe such a myself? So this was written in the 50s, so it's a little dated, you know, it still has Cold War stuff and so on and so forth. So it goes like this, they had just found out how to make a cosmic energy bomb. And there was a question, where can they try it out? And it was already said that if you dared to do that, it would be such a chain reaction here that would blow up the whole planet. So decided that they should do it on the moon. And the date that they had said was to be the full moon of the vernal equinox, Pesach night. 3 days before, while there was going on a broadcast of news over the world, a ham, in those days you had to use that, managed to patch in to that broadcast and say, "My name is Yahu Gilead. Mashiach is coming in 3 days." So, that Pesach night, boy, did I say some nasty things about Reform and conservative rabbis. That story was published in Orthodox Jewish Life. They couldn't do any perfume peddling of essence of Judaism and the spirit of Judaism. Nasty stuff. And in the Catskills, people had moved out their rocking chairs to look at the moon. And here, that bomb was detonated, and the whole moon got enveloped with that. And a shockwave started to come. The United Nations had set up that there should be a meeting in Tehran, Davke, you know. But what happened on the moon created an earthquake, and so they had to move it over to Yerushalayim. And there it was that the American eagle and the Russian bear and the British lion, you know, all the animals of the peaceable kingdom come together, and there they were sitting and waiting. How are we going to work this out when the door opens up and Mashiach ben David comes in? And since that time, there have been 3 harvests a year instead of only 1. And there's daylight even at night. And alle gute Sachen, just like the rabbis have said. So my science fiction fan was happy about that. I'm not so sure I would be happy today if we would get that kind of radiation from the moon. Another moon thing I can tell you, that when I was in Israel in '59, I wanted to, among other things, get my doctorate from Gershom Scholem and get a Jungian analysis, a training analysis from Erich Neumann, Oliver Scholl. So I came to see him and asked him whether he would take me on. And he started to probe, and we started to talk about the moon. And I said, quoting what we find in the Zohar, the moon has nothing of its own. Leit le megarmei klum. So he said, that's only about the bright light. But there's dark light in the moon. And that is very wonderful, because in some way, the longing that isn't yet fulfilled is the dark light, is that kind of power that makes for us to go through a kind of tide that comes and goes, but the tide keeps on coming. So, having said that, I think you take it from here.
Oh. You know, I remember the original title is Cupid Jewish, but I didn't remember Baptir's subtitle, which had to do with angels. So, in my mind, the spinning of this was Cherub Jewish, was Cupid Jewish, Varieties of Love and Desire. So that's how it sat in my head. Hence, that whole list of all the different flavors of words that we have for different kinds of love. Can you call out some that you have in English, in any language? The different words that we have collectively between us. Amor. Eros. Amore.
Filia agape.
Filia agape. There's English too. Liebe. What are the different flavors? Sensuality. Attraction.
Chocolate.
Passion.
Chocolate?
Chocolate.
For St. Valentine's Day, that fits.
Oh, yeah, poor St. Valentine. There was one from over here that I didn't hear. Puppy love. That's sweet.
Infatuation.
Infatuation. Fascination.
Codependent.
Co-defendants. Obsession.
These are all Persian names too.
Poison. Lust.
Take notes here.
Desire.
Desire.
Chemistry.
Chemistry.
Insanity.
Insanity.
Symbiosis.
Symbiosis.
Fusion.
Fusion.
Cold fusion.
Cold fusion.
Henry.
If we were keeping records, we could check out the optimists and the pessimists.
Commitment.
Commitment. Warmth. Caring. Compassion. Passion.
Kiruv levavot.
Kiruv levavot, the coming together of hearts. Conjunctio, the coming together. Who here knows the story of Lilith? Lilith, a couple. So I'm going to expand on it. Because remember how in the story of creation there are two accounts, right? The first one says they were male and female, they were created. And the second one is the more detailed story of Adam alone and then Adam minus a rib but plus a wife. And the questions, of course, proceed. How come there are two stories? And of course, the tales that grow up out of this are always very interesting. So the story of Lilith, or Lilith, comes like this. Adam's first wife was created together with him. And they were exploring and discovering and living together, and Lilith got a little tired. How can I put this? Adam had a certain lack of erotic imagination. And Lilith was getting bored. And suggested the turnabout was fair play. And Adam did not like this idea.
That was foreplay.
Thank you, pizza. The turnabout was foreplay. Well, that works. Adam was having a hard time with this. And so Zalman was having a hard time with this.
This is the comedy channel? This is the Jewish?
Lilith finally had just sort of had it and was too bored to stick around, so she left. She left and found a cave far off, in which there were some very interesting demons, and they were much more playful. In the meantime, Adam complained to God. The partner you gave me, she disappeared on me. Bring her back, I'm lonely. So he sent 3 angels, Sinoi, Sensenoi, and Samangalov. I have no idea where these names come from. Tirza, do you know where these names come from? These angels show up at Lilith's cave, where she is disporting with the demons and having scads of babies as a result. And they said, we're deployed here to bring you back to Adam. She said, nothing doing. And they said, but God told us you need to come back to Adam. She said, And she simply refused and retreated further in the cave, and they returned to God and said, she won't come. God said, you gotta go back and get her back. So they tried a second time, and now here's the most marvelous piece of negotiation. They come back and they say, come on, you were made to be a partner to Adam, and here you are, and if you don't go back, kill all your demon babies. She said, it's all right. Every day I have 100 more. There will always be enough demon babies. So finally, they really said, God really insists, we have to force you to come. She said, I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. And they were so relieved. And here was the deal she proposed. If any woman in the future, in childbirth, puts out an amulet with your names, Sanoy, Sensonoy, and Samanglof, then I won't damage her or the baby. How's that? And they were so relieved that they said yes, and didn't really realize they'd been had. They went, and Lilith stayed away from Adam. But what we do hear from this story is it's a folk tale, but it's an old folk tale. So what you hear from this is the degree of alarm that comes up when female sexuality kind of sprouts an independence, and an independence from the family structure that it was supposed to start out in. And I have no conclusions about that. It's just a very interesting spin-out and open question. Why Lilith, who really then could exemplify the first woman of very independent mind, who took her own sensuality seriously enough not to stay where she was bored, but why she has then been considered a dangerous figure. And who is she a danger to? She's a danger in the folk tradition to mothers, new babies, and is a temptress of men. That is, this independence of sexuality and sensuality, though Adam rejected it in the beginning, is nevertheless a temptation to stray from a certain social structure for other men. And I just thought that, Valentine's Day wouldn't be complete without inviting Lilith to at least make an appearance.
Schönen Dank. So now you can understand why the magazine of Jewish feminists was called Lilith. And the name has something to do with night. Lila, Lilith, the night woman. And you get the sense that things having to do with the dark frighten some people, and on the other hand, become a very special place for those who have a deeper faith. So when you have Yoshe, Beseta Elyon, Besel Shadayit Lona, there is a certain amount of dark godness available. But if you look at the way in which you have the sine curve, what is above the median line and what goes below the median line, a lot of Jewish teaching, as far as we got to know it easily, was above the median line. It tried to speak of these things from a level of light, from a level of consciousness, and so on. The dark side, the empty side, the hollow, the containing side, that wasn't pushed that much. And yet, it is very necessary to be able to keep that in mind too. And when you look at the way in which, as Eve is telling the story of Lilith and the three names of those angels that are the warrant, that warrant for us the safety of the child and the mother, if you ask, did anybody live that way? Did they take it seriously? And there used to be a custom of Wachnacht, the night before the bris, because it was at that time that crib deaths and so on and so forth often occurred, and people were really worried about it. And so they would get amulets together. They would bring the children from Cheder to the home of the Kimpetom, childbed woman, and the baby. And they would do Kriyat Shva there at the crib of the baby. And in this way, they were able to ward off those difficult things that might happen should one not stay alert during the night of watch night. Now, a strange thing is that you may sometimes drive by a Protestant church before New Year's and it'll say watch night service. Have you ever seen that? Wachnacht, watch night. Okay. And why is that? Because New Year's is also the feast of the circumcision among the Christians. Do you see how deep these things go with the sense of, and the blessing that we recite at the bris says something to lehatzil yedidut mi beten, mi shachar, to make sure that the child will be saved from destruction, from perdition. So you can understand very well how this set itself up for us. Now, as we tell these things, we look at them from the outside. And if you look at them from the outside, they sound trite. If you take the lyrics of all the love songs and look at them, oi, such Narishkeiten. But when you are in love, they're all emes, right? That's the truth. That speaks for me. Those are the words that I have. So I want us to consider, therefore, what kind of power there is. And if we talk a little bit Kabbalese, let's take a look and see how love operates in all the four worlds. Joseph Heller, who, I'm not talking about the novelist, I'm talking about the person who first was the special student of of Ida Rolf. He then went and did his own work, calling it Heller work. And I had my sessions with him, and one day he tells me this one. Love is such an intrinsic part of the universe, and if you want to see it in action, it's in gravity. Two bodies in space attract one another. Now that notion, that birds of a feather flock together, v'kapseinu yachad, that slime mold wants to come together and become one thing. When I talk about all these things, there is a certain truth to that. V'kapseinu yachad, we want to be gathered together. Go back to that wonderful feeling that a child has, saying, I want daddy and mommy and the doggy and the cat and the teddy bear all under one blankie, right? That sense of wanting to bring everything together is such a marvelous feeling that you have. And I think that is there, and I would say that's the ground of love in the world of Yetzirah. Just take gravity up one step, and it is two bodies in space attract one another, or two beings in space attract one another. And that's how it would be. We are not made to be enemies. We are made to be lovers and friends from that basic place on. And if we could really go back and bring this back into a dream world, that we are just meant to love one another, that we are just meant to be together, to do things together, to be things together. But that would be wonderful. In the world of Berea, an orgasm is an aha. Those of you who have said aha now know what I mean. Do you see how it is that there are these two things that come together, and insight comes together, and you see the unity that is between these things. And you say, aha. You look at the word universe, and you realize that there's a polarity built in. There's uni up there and diversity down here, and universe is the union and the diversity all in one. And when you get that, you see how love operates in the world of Bria and in the mind. Now, how is it in the world of Atzilut? I can't describe this because, first of all, Atzilut is wordless. You can't have words. But let's go to the place where we have an intuition that we all belong together, that we all one. That intuition that goes with the Shema Yisrael and the Echad. And we truly get into the Echad to see it's really one, it's all really one. And since now, most of the time, when we get to verbal or cognitive thought, in other words, no longer in the world of Atzilut, we come down, we have a longing. And that's the longing that many of us have if we will allow ourselves to be aware of. Because these are moments of that being, of being in that space that our mind can't handle. So it takes a different kind of innering to go back to that place where you would say, aha, I was there, I'm not there now. But I can recognize that I was there, that I was in that oneness, that I was integral, that everything was one. And so when you go and do some deeper work, you begin to see that even in the way in which you understand things in the mind, you have to understand them from a point of view of participatory epistemology. That's to say, it's not something that I understand that's outside of me. What I understand, in order to be true, must include my being in it. So when people talk about, they make pictures of the spirot, you know, that kind of, what do the kids,
Hopscotch.
Huh?
Hopscotch.
The hopscotch, yes? Picture of the 10 sefirot. Most of the time people don't see themselves in that, contained in that. They see it outside of them. And that's the reason why it doesn't work. This is why all the people who want to do Kabbalah miss the point because they stay outside of it. It's like trying to understand the beauty of a stained glass window looking from the outside on a sunny day. You have, and this has to do something again with the dark, and this, I turn back to you, my dear.
Oh. What's been, this is short, but it's been nudging me. And it has to do, again, I bring it back to Lilith again, to the business of the dark, and the power of the dark and the power of desire. Because what happens, first there's desire, and if we're lucky, comes with that emotion and love and attachment and commitment, all that. And then what do? We try to civilize it. And so we create these structures whereby there's a stable family where children will have at least 2 parents, and with polygamy or polyandry, more than 2 parents, you get a whole tribe, but you get a viable social structure in which children can live and grow. And the thing is this, what happens when you try to civilize such a primal, unbridled, uncontrollable power as desire is it becomes civilized, which can become, in the end, really boring. And that was Adam. There's Adam all over again. And then what do? You know, there have been cultures in which the thing to do then, because this was open to men more often than to women, is they seek undomesticated sensuality outside of the civilized, domesticated social structure. Because there's something about the uncontrolled and the uncontrollable and the undomesticated that is really true and really important. And for many of us, really essential to our being. If it really isn't anywhere in our relationship, something very urgent is missing. And of course, there are those of us who may have been trained to value safety and security more than that, in which case it comes as a threat. And the question I want to sort of dangle out to take home with us is, how does one remain in a civilized, stable relationship that is socially acceptable and safe for children to grow in, and within that context still nurture and nourish and invite the wild and undomesticated?
Where does it come from, that feeling of threat? If you watch the internal mechanics, if you will, it's so wonderfully described to us in the story of Joseph and Madame Potiphar. She is enticing him time and time again. And the way in which the Torah says, and he refused. But if you recall, the trope on that is a shalshelet, which is like, he refused. You get the sense that what is it that a person does for himself, a man does for himself, when he wants to say, I don't dare to break the safety of the family situation. He paints for himself the consequences, the dire consequences, the punishment, the shame, all these kinds of things, so that with each time that he says no to himself and uses all these images for himself, he stokes, as it were, he builds stronger that kind of sense of threat that comes. So that one could say that the psychological thing of the Lilith threat is the strong longing and the desire to experience that, and the way in which say, I didn't want to do it, I didn't want to do it. So that sense of, and I don't want to do it, and so there is that build-up that comes along with the threat. I want to go.
Would you please, what's that quote that since the exile the taste has run out of food?
Yes.
And this sense of wildness, of the fulfillment of wildness has gone out of.
Very good. Eve is reminding me, Miyom shecharav beit hamikdash nitla tam bia venitna be'arayot. From the day the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem, the taste of coming was taken away from marriage and put into illicit relations.
Huh?
I'll give it to you back again, you can translate it yourself. Miyom shecharav beit hamikdash nitla tam bia venitna be'arayot. It has another one there, it says the same thing about meat. Miyom shecharav beit hamikdash nitla tam basar venitna be'atzamot. That there is more taste in the marrow and in the bones than there is in the meat itself from the time the temple was destroyed. It is as if to say that during the time that the temple was there and you were able to sacralize eating meat by bringing it as a korban, as a sacrifice, you were able to taste all those tastes of the meat. And later on, that was taken away from us. We no longer have that. So that's the quote that you wanted me to share, yes. What did you want to say about it?
I wanted to dangle as another question to take home. What in the primal harmony and structure of things, when disrupted, makes those kinds of separations so that things are no longer unified in the place where we want them to be. When you were speaking earlier, Zalman, you were talking about the temptation of Mrs. Potiphar. That is the temptation, the strength of eros coming from an illicit place, coming from out of the structure of the family. And my question is, what is it that needs to be restored so that that excitement can reappear even within the domesticated structure of the family? What is it that we actually do to chase it away? What can we do to invite it back?
Someone wrote a book, High Monogamy.
He spoke here.
Huh?
Did he not speak here?
No, that in Schnarch, Dr. Schnarch was talking about passionate marriage. There is this
George Leonard.
George Leonard was the one who wrote that. I remember there was even a 12-inch vinyl record about how to belly dance for your husband. You know? So the point that you're raising, is there a possibility of bringing that back? And I want to say, it depends on how one is initiated into sexuality. Let's go back for a moment to the no-nos, you know? If one were to follow the way in which they say, just say no, okay? And contain yourself until marriage. Take a look how many times a person has to say no and how they have to threaten their lust and calm it down and cool it out and do all kinds of things by saying those no's all during that time. And when I look in our literature, I can find a lot of no-nos. But there isn't enough yes, yes being written about that. Except that from time to time something peeks out. And just like in the Song of Songs, if you read the Song of Songs, sometimes I think Marcia Falk's translation is helpful there. For a couple to read it to each other, what a wonderful thing that becomes. But if you look in the Art Scroll Sitter, and you want to read this to your lover, you know, you're gonna get people very sleepy about that. So it's really so that in order to be able to bring that back, the Zohar tried to allow this for us to say, when you make love as a husband and wife and lichvot Shabbat, you, the male, become the container for Kudsha Berichu, for the Holy One, blessed be He. And she becomes the container for the Matronita, for the Shechina, for the female divine presence. And when you have a zivuk together, in which your hearts and your minds and your bodies all join together to get past that sense of separation, when that happens to you, that is not only a mitzvah, but you bring about that in heaven that should be completed. So that's why we say in the Daven L'Shem Yichud, Kudsha B'Richu Shchinte. So the Zohar brought back all these kinds of things into our dream life, into our imagination. It was there before, because if you study Midrash Shir HaShirim to begin with, you get to see how then the life matrix of the love story fueled the dreams, the dreams of the whole people, and of Torah and all that stuff, because they had a live model. What goes on before that? Before it even gets into Abrahamic Judaism, when I go and ask what happened in pre-patriarchal Judaism, most scholars would call that paganism before that. But when I think of what the Canaanites did and what we have found in the writings from Ugarit and the myths that were from before, I get a sense that if you wanted Earth to be fertile, then you had to go to a sacred place and with a sacred person, a Kadesh or a Kadesha, consummate in order to bring down the blessing. One of the points about milchik and fleshik, not to eat meat and milk together as far as the origins of the idea, not why we don't do it today, is because it was a custom among pagans at that time where a priest would be eating a concoction of a kid seethed in its mother's milk, and that was supposed to be the powerful enabler to be able to consummate with two priestesses in public. And when that happened, then was a sign that they would have a good season, and that would be done during the equinox times. So the Torah tells us, I would like to see you 3 times a year come up to Yerushalayim, but don't do this meat and milk business, okay? Do you understand what was behind it? So that there was that sense of, and it comes from being closer to Earth and is coming back to us in a way. Take a look what's happened when you read something that Starhawk writes and that the people who are involved in Wicca, and they're all talking about this kind of thing, how Earth is got energies and sky has energies, and that the wedding of these two is what it's all about, and this is what will make peace for us. And when I start looking at, I'm trying to remember his name, not Carpo, what's his name? Huh? No, there's no elephant here? Lakov. Have any of you read Lakov's book? Where he talks about the frame. And the frame is not a conscious thing. The frame is behind our consciousness. And the frame under which America is running right now is stern father, not nurturing mother. Okay? And if you take a look how this operates itself, that when there is more of stern father than nurturing mother around, and take a look, the notion of saying somebody is a motherfucker, you know, that comes from stern father stuff. To say that tree huggers, you know, are seen as bad people and so on and so forth. Why? Because they feel a lot of the energy of the earth, and they feel a lot of the energy of the sky, and there's a sense that we want to make a union here. So that's my response to what you said, and now you continue. I have something to say after you're done. You're done? Yeah? Okay. All right, we'll see what's going to happen. If I would be able to do a thing of virtual reality in which I would be able to design a sanctuary in which with every step that you take, you get more and more, if you will, anxious, because your ego isn't so safe anymore, because it looks like you're going to be swallowed up by a mystery that is waiting ahead of you. And each time you go between one set of doors or curtains into the next realm, more and more of your ego falls off, and therefore anxiety comes in, a holy dread, because you're approaching the mysterium tremendum. But you can't help it. That tremendous mystery is there. And on the one hand, you dread it and you're afraid of it because you have to lose your ego there. And on the other hand, it is so fascinating It's a mysterium fascinans. It calls you closer, closer. It sings its siren song, if you will. You must enter here because this is what it's all about. And so you get the sense there's dread building up, and at the same time, the closer you get, the closer you want to get. To the point that in the Torah it says that tell the people when the Torah was being given at Sinai, Vehigbalta et Hahar, make sure you make a boundary, Pen Yersu, the people want to break through, or run closer like moths running into the flame, what people would want to come close to. And one of the things that we see on the curtain is described to us as the keruvim. They were embroidered on the curtain. They look, cherubim is the usual translation for that, but it's a bad translation because we aren't even sure yet what it means in Hebrew, so I won't describe them to you yet, okay? But then you get still a little bit farther in, and by this time you better be a Kohen, and maybe even a Kohen Gadol, because there, over the Holy Ark, are two figures with wings, and those figures with wings cover the Ark to the point that when you want to say that Moses received special intelligence from the infinite, he entered to that place to listen to the voice that came to him, Mibein HaKeruvim, from between those cherubim. So imagine in your imagination, you're going there, you're coming closer and closer to those kerubim. Remember when Eve was talking before about that fear, that dread, that angst that I later on described. It has to do with guilt, it has to do with the stern father frame. Coming upon those beings, if you have a guilty conscience, what would they look like to you, friendly or unfriendly? You'd get a sense that they are frightening beings, in a way. And so, on the other hand, if you come in there with that wonderful sense of innocence that says, Et halech lifnei Hashem beyarzot hachayim et halech, I will walk before God in the lands of the living with this great joy. What would it feel like then for you? Oh, they're smiling at me. And so you can imagine almost like in this kind of a Rorschach that tells, you know, one of those scary beings, or if you see it with a smile. And it all has to do, kamayim hapanim lapanim ken lev ha'adam el ha'adam. Just as you look onto the surface of water and you see yourself mirrored, so one heart to another is, if I come to you with love, I get a flashback of love. And so that's the way it goes, kamayim apanim lapanim. Now the way in which we are being told about the keruvim goes like this. It might mean really like a ravia, but they look like little kids. Why? Because they're trying to find out what they look like, okay? I want to tell you about a place where I was, where I got a sense of what the keruvim might have been like. At Red Feather Lake is a Shambhala mountain center. And there is a stupa there. The stupa is one of those Buddhist buildings that is supposed to be in 3 dimensions what a mandala is in 2 dimensions. When you see a mandala, it's flat. But if you could imagine, you know, a 3-dimensional mandala, that which is in the center would be way on top. And so you could look down on that stupa from on top and you would see the mandala there. And it's a very beautiful mandala. Usually, you take your shoes off and there's an entrance there and there's a big Buddha statue. And the artist did a great job. And there is a place on the floor where you can sit down and look up. And then it looks, you have a sense that you're being seen by that Buddha. Okay? So powerful is that look there. And then, if you have the permission, someone is going to push some buttons, a code, and a door will open up, and you can then go upstairs. And when you come upstairs, there are 2 figures there. A blue male one, embracing a red female one. He, with such a passionate face like this, and penetrating her, and she has a leg around him as they're standing up, and they're intertwined with their arms, and they also have wings. And when I came in there, I wanted to say, excuse me, and walk out. You know, because it was such a powerful depicting. Now follow me another step, okay? On a higher level still, there was another couple, but they were seated in Yabyum. They were older than the passionate younger ones. And so you have again a sense of Yetzirah and Bria there, where the Zohar says that Chochmah and Bina, Abba and Ima, father and mother, are Trein Rayin Delomit Parshin. There are 2 lovers who are not separated. So you have it there in that setting, okay? So, the Talmud tells us that when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple, what happened was that they carried out the Keruvim. And the Keruvim were, and that's how they have it, as a male and a female in embrace together. The Midrash also says that when Israel did not do the will of their Father in heaven, then the 2 cherubs were back to back. But when God loved us, then we're face to face. So the Babylonians were saying, carrying them out, not only face to face, but intertwined with each other, saying, "Oi, look what those Jews have in their most sacred place." Get that? And I can imagine that someone want to say, look what those Buddhists have in their sacred place. Okay? But there is a question. If the temple was destroyed, then they should have been back to back, because wasn't that a sign that God didn't love us anymore? So many of the Hasidic masters, but the first one who said it, I believe, was Rabbi Yeshua Heschel of Apt, who quotes the Talmud and says, when a husband is about to leave his wife and go on a journey, before he goes, they have to be together. And that's the reason why they were so intertwined face to face, the 2 cherubs.
I think I just want to make a short parenthesis here that has to do with the nature of the intertwining of the masculine and feminine it's very easy to think that we mean only in relationship and only between male and female, when actually this polarity is built into our world. You know, it's built into atomic structure, it's built into our nature as human beings. And it also has to do with the intertwining and the harmonizing and the union of masculine and feminine within each of us, and within partnerships that are not your standard male and female partnerships. There is the same balancing of masculine and feminine aspects, and the same need to have some sort of union and overcoming of resistance to union.
Do you want to tell a bit of the Mesirat Nefesh story?
No, I wanted to tell the other story.
Go ahead.
How long have we got?
If we want to go home, we can already. Listen, go talk about all this kind of stuff and stay here with you.
You're here with us? But I did have a story in mind. You know, I see from looking at who's here, that some of you have found life partners, some of you have not, some of you probably, who here has children that you're worried already they're going to find a partner, the right partner? So I would like to tell this story because Valentine's Day has not only to do with love and eros, but with partnership, with finding one's beloved, or with being with one's beloved. And this is a true story. When I lived in Yerushalayim, I had a friend, a British Orthodox woman, about, well, a little older than me, not much, who still wasn't married. This was a Shanta. And she decided that what she had to do was visit a rabbi that she knew and knew about, who lived in Migdal HaEmek. So we were young. I was in my 30s. She might have already been in her 40s, I don't know. We hitchhiked from Jerusalem to Migdal HaEmek and visited over Shabbat Reb Nachman Boulder, and heard the following story, which I think they told for my friend's sake. And it goes as follows. They had, of course, lots of children. They had a daughter who, when she was still in school, probably about 17, 18, read an article written by a yeshiva student that was completely excoriating the yeshiva world and laying out everything that he thought was wrong with it that had to be fixed. And she was very impressed because she felt the same way. And she asked her father, because that's how they do it in those families, asked her father to please ask the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the yeshiva where the young man was studying, if this person was still single or married. And so her father got on the phone and asked about this yeshiva boy who was either in Britain or South Africa, I forget, and was told he's married. Oh well, the daughter sighed and went on shidduch dates and nothing doing. She couldn't find anybody who suited, and she finally left Israel and was working in London and got one of those unexpected last-minute fares to come home and visit. And so, without telling them, she surprised them. She landed, she dashed from the airport as fast as she could to Migdal HaEmek. She slid into the house with the brakes screeching just before Shabbos. Oh, this sounds familiar to some of us, no? And she discovered that her parents had a house guest, and this was years later, when she should have been married with 3 or 4 kids already, and she just couldn't find anyone. They had a house guest from South Africa. It was the guy. There had been 2 young men of the same name at that yeshiva, one of whom was married. The one who wrote this article was not, and still was not, which was already a miracle. Now, how did this come about? Some months before, the young woman in Britain was complaining that she was praying every night that she should find her zivug, she should find her partner, and nothing was happening. And a friend finally said, remember when they say, "Hamipalel ba'ad chavero," the one who prays on behalf of their friends also benefits. So,
Benefits first.
right, benefits, So it was suggested to her that she stop already praying that she should find her partner, but pray that her partner, who is just as lost, should find his partner. And she had been doing this for some months. And there he was. And so after the parents were already exhausted and finally had gone off to bed, they stayed up in the living room and talked and talked and talked. And at 3 in the morning woke her parents and said that after Havdalah they wanted to do Tnaim. And the very next day he had to return to South Africa. And they would make arrangements thereafter, which is, by the way, what happened. So for those who either themselves or have children who need to find the right partner, the advice is obvious. Tell them about praying that their partner, whom they should love, should have less difficulty finding their partner.
Songs. Please.
What?
How about a duet?
Shamayim mesapterim kevod, v'chamaretz malachas, reyuchichol ele asesayada, ki hu atzur peyoloi sonim, yom tzemechubba, mikol yomim, mikol yomim, ay, ki v'shavah, Surah Elamim, Surah Elamim. So good at the end. I want to have, Not yet, not yet. I want to say a good word at the end of all this to bring a certain balance, not so much for Lilith, but for Eve. Okay? And that goes as follows. There was one of our friends is a Professor Harris. He was at Spertus in Chicago, Munford Harris, and he wrote a very beautiful article once about romantic love and leal love. Romantic love and leal love. It turned out that there was a chaplain Andrews who wrote a book about romantic love. Now you got to understand what what there was about that. Minne singers would travel, and Minne is very much, it's a German word of really an erotic sexual love. So Minne singers would be traveling, they were the bards, and they would travel around and sing their songs and do all that. And what they basically described was a kind of love where the lady love is on the balcony and the swain is serenading her from below.
Dame la mano mi paloma para subir al tu nido, maldicha que duerme sola.
La signora en la ventana. There she was. So the Zohar uses the same kind of mashal, talking about how the Torah is ulamta shapirta. She's a very beautiful woman. Describes her though with one eye. That's interesting, in that she is in a tower like this. Reb Nachman has a number of stories of princesses that needed to be rescued, and one princess who put on man's clothes and she was even better than all the men in that story, the story of the lost princess, so he's got great stuff about that. What this meant was that you did not want to consummate that love. And as Lyle Harris would talk, not Lyle, Mumford Harris would talk about it, he would say that from time to time when it got too hard for the young man, the princess would send him a maid, but at the same time they wouldn't consummate. The whole point was to keep that longing, to keep that German word is Sehnsucht, which means longing sickness, you know, that passionate sense going. Then Lyle I say, then Mumford Harris goes and turns it around and says, but there is such a thing as Leo love. And in Leo love there is consummation, and there is that thing that gives safety and trust and all these good things that we would want to have in a relationship where children could be begotten and raised. So he talks about that as Leo love. So I asked myself, what must it have been like, you know? So he says, do you love me? And she says, do I what? For 25 years, if that's not love, then she doesn't know what's love. Now, in Yiddish, you would say there's not so much die Liebe. There used to be a YIVO, still is YIVO, Jewish Scientific Institute, Yiddish Scientific Institute, and they gave out a songbook of all those love songs that maids in Warsaw would sing to each other in Yiddish. Oi, Gewalt, was tut mir die Liebe, sie hat mir doch so viel Chakaye gemacht. All those, the terrible description of what love can do and who needs it and so on and so forth, that's there. But if you were to ask, how do they consider love? For instance, I think of Reb Sholem Belzer and his Malka. You know, it is a great love story, but it didn't express itself, certainly not for the public in such a way that it would show any of the passion. Nevertheless, if you had eyes, so here's the story. The Ropshitzer Rebbe brings his son with him, Reb Lezel, and since they were close friends to Reb Sholem Belzer, they didn't need to be announced. They could always walk in unannounced. So the Ropshitzer comes in with his son, and he finds Reb Sholem Belzer and his wife in a very warm, amorous conversation. Now, it's almost as if the Ropshitzer want to go like this to his son, you know, because al tarbe sicha im ha'isha, you shouldn't be talking too much to your wife. You shouldn't have these kinds of conversations. And here he finds the two of them engaged in, listen, we have enough conversation. Not holiness and penance, this conversation, okay? But he finds that they're talking to each other, and he asks his son when they go back, because they didn't want to interrupt. You can have a sense that this was an intimate conversation that they were having. It's not that they overheard it, but they saw it. And so they backed out, and he asked his son, what was it that you saw in there? And his son said, Adam and Chava before the Eitz Hadat. Adam and Eve, when it says, V'lo yitboshashu. And they didn't have a sense of shame about that. It was so wonderful, so natural how they shared. I want to tell you a story about sort of love at first sight, in a way. Eve and I started to work together a long time ago when we had the mystery school, and she was the young Baal Shem Tov. You should have seen her. Oh, huh?
I was there.
Yeah, it was delicious, okay? Now, there is the question about how did the Baal Shem Tov meet his wife? And there was a great man who was the father of Gershon Kitteva, and I think his name was Rabbi Zalman, who had met young Yisrolik and asked him to become, seeing the greatness of who he is to yet become, asked him to become his son-in-law. And so they wrote Tanaim, they wrote the engagement contract, and each one had a copy of it. Rabbi Zalman came home and he died, and he didn't have a chance to talk to anyone about that engagement contract. And here comes the Baal Shem Tov with his copy of the engagement contract to his brother-in-law. He comes dressed like the equivalent of a hippie, you know, of a redneck of that time. He doesn't come dressed like a Shena Rabbonische person, you know, what they call in Polish duchowne zvanie, you know, oiskeputz like a galach, you know. But he comes just in this plain way and says, I'd like to marry my wife. I've come to collect her. And he shows him the contract, and he's appalled. The first thought that comes to his mind, how much will he want before he lets go of that contract? I'm going to buy him off. I can't have my sister marry him. But he insists. He says, don't you have a copy too? And he had to admit that he had a copy of that contract too. So he's trying to talk him out of it, and he says, I must tell my sister about that. And he goes and talks to her. And she says, before you say no, I want to talk to her. So they go into a room together, the door is open, and they talk to each other. A few minutes later on, she comes out and she says, I want to marry this man. And I want to know, what did they say to each other? I think that's a good question to leave you with. You can fill it in with your beloved in your own way. A good night.
There is one more thing. We did not manage with an overhead projector, but there is an illustration that accompanied, but it was not accepted for publication, accompanied an article that each of us contributed to in a book that's now out of print called We Too, of couples who lasted into the 90s. And this one is called Jewish Foreplay.
What's the book?
There's a copy of the Zohar, a copy of Gesenius, and a book by Fabre d'Olivet called The Hebrew Tongue Restored.